This is TV Podcast Industries looking at The Watchmen, Episode 8, A God Walks Into Abar. Welcome back, fellow watchers. This is TV Podcast Industries, and we are on episode 8 of The Watchmen, which is entitled A God Walks Into Abar. Not a bar, Abar.
For weeks it's been written with a space between the A and the B in a bar at the end, but it makes a lot more sense because this episode is about a God walking into Angela Abar, right?
Yeah, exactly. The collision of beings that leads to a chain of events, equal opposite reactions, as it were.
Yes.
But, fellow watchers, will you have dinner with me tomorrow night? That is the question that I will ask at the start, and you'll have to determine by the end whether you will come for dinner. A bit like Dr. Manhattan in Saigon with Angela. So, yes, fellow watchers, I hope you choose to take up the offer.
But surely you know that whether they have or not already, right? Because everything's happening at the same time. Just to reference, we don't have Chris as our third host this week. We only have the two of us, Dr. Harrison here and myself. Actually, I can't keep calling you Dr. Harrison. Do you have a first name?
Yes, it's John. You can call me John. It's John with an H.
Nice.
Yes.
But in reference to the fact that we don't have Chris here, and Chris has been talking about in our feedback episodes and the main episodes that he doesn't like flashbacks in his episodes. This episode has 0 flashbacks in it. One entire episode of the series where everything just happens at the same time.
Yeah,
no flashbacks.
This was quite good, actually. It was as though the Watchmen series was trolling Chris.
Mm-hmm.
He, I think, had said in the last episode that it was just about enough flashbacks from his side as we get a flashback. But then it is neatly mentioned by Dr. Manhattan that everything is occurring both now, in the future, and in the past. These, for him, the way he perceives time is that they're all happening at the same time.
Yes.
So technically, maybe it's not a flashback.
And if you think about it, also technically, episode 6, where we had Angela Abar experiencing what happened to Will Reeves, her grandfather, that was also not a flashback. That was her experiencing what happened because of the nostalgia pills that she took. And then when she comes back to herself in episode 7, she's also experiencing her memories from the past as well. So again, not flashbacks. She's actually going through them as if being there. So I love it. I think the show is.
I don't think Chris is going to buy that, though.
I don't think so.
No.
But anyway, I am one of your other hosts, Derek, by the way. Not only John, I have no H's in my name at all. So there are just 2 of us here for this episode, and we will crack through episode 8, A God Walks Into Abar. But quickly, before we run ahead, it's very important, fellow watchers, did you stay through the end credits of this episode? Because we have our first ever post-credits scene of The Watchmen. If you didn't, it's a very important scene, I think. So pause here, go back and watch the end of the episode, because there is a good 4 or 5 minutes, I think, at the end, isn't there?
Yeah, because there's a conversation that starts over the credits. It is Miss Crookshanks and Mr. Phillips, and with Adrian Veidt. And then as the credits end, you get transported to the man in the manor house, or as we now know it to be the moon of Europa, circling Jupiter.
Yes, exactly. So run off, go see that, come back to us. We'll still be here when you get back, but do watch it, because it's going to seem weird when we start talking about the episode. There's going to be moments that we'll need to talk about the end as well, because they are quite important, I think.
Yeah, very important. This is very much a timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly kind of an episode, but it certainly gives us all the answers. I mean, I really do think this, both in terms of what's going on with Adrian Veidt, because that was getting a little surreal with piggies trotting through the court and so on, and with the cake and the horseshoe. What do these mean? Well, we certainly get to find these out. We also get a lot of other bits and bobs as well in this episode, leading us right into the final episode where I think we're going to just see events unfold within Tulsa.
Yeah, exactly. We only have 2 episodes left, but do make sure that you subscribe to our podcast over on tvpodcastindustries.com, because we've got loads more happening over the course. Hopefully before season 2 of The Watchmen starts. We have loads more other programs to talk about and loads more other TV shows. Season 2 of Watchmen, once again, it's still not confirmed. It's confirmed as a 1-season show, which will wrap up. And then maybe there might be another story for season 2, we think, if it's going to be confirmed. But what we did see this week is the ratings for the show are massive. They're about as big as HBO gets, really. Chris mentioned very early on that a lot of people watch HBO on their Go apps, rather than on their television a lot. It seems to be much more where people watch in the US as opposed to just flicking on their TV to the channel HBO. Live ratings for the show are around 1.5 million, somewhere around that for the first episode, and went down to about 770,000 for the next episode, which is quite high for live ratings on HBO. What they've actually revealed is that's only 10% roughly of the audience that watches the episode per week. They are averaging about 7.1 million viewers per episode for the show. So massive success. If it was dependent on ratings for the show to be renewed, this would have been renewed after episode 1, really. But HBO don't depend on ratings. They see themselves as kind of a premium channel where people go and watch premium types of entertainment. So sometimes they do 1 season of a massively successful show because it's massively successful, and they leave it at that, and they've told their story. Sometimes they have shows that run for 5 or 6 seasons because they want to keep telling more and more story. I don't know which way they'll lean with Watchmen at the moment, but it's great to know that there's a lot of people watching.
I think it allows them the freedom to be to do a creative decision.
Yeah.
I think there is the scope to do it because it's been successful, and there is the scope to do it because they feel that there is additional story that must be told, can be told, is worth telling, and so can do it that way. Or they can go, this was great, it was very successful, but we're not going any further. It doesn't require any more explanation.
Yeah, exactly.
So, it's like sequels. It's now like this on the gravy train with Star Wars ones, and to be honest, most of them, I'm a massive Star Wars fan, but most of them I have no real affection for, apart from probably Rogue One, actually, of all the latest stuff. I find they just regurgitate what the first 3 did, in a different way with new stormtroopers or whatever. And I really do find that we're on that gravy train, and I think it's great if Watchmen decides we don't need that Watchmen gravy train, because otherwise it undermines effectively the IP or the basis of this piece of work.
Well, in fairness, I think they're all very competent, everybody that's been involved in this show. And in fairness, they did also do something like 165 days of writing the show to put it together before it came to anything to do with the screen at all. So any kind of filming took place after the 165 days of writing. So if given the opportunity and they say, we're going to do Watchmen 3. So if this is Watchmen 2, the sequel to the graphic novel or the comic books from the 80s, and then in 2 or 3 years' time, they decide we're going to do Watchmen 3 because we come up with a great story of what could happen in the future of these characters. Actually, awesome. Brilliant. Go do it. No problem at all. As long as it's awesome, because it needs to be to keep up with this. Anyway, we've kind of gone a little bit off track there. We normally talk about this stuff in our feedback episodes. If you want to share your thoughts on this episode or anything to do with the Watchmen series, make sure you email us to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com. Our cutoff point for feedback is Wednesdays, lunchtime GMT. Just email us with your thoughts and we'll talk about them on our next episode. Let's get into our discussion about this episode, though, John.
Yes. Derek, what are some of the episode details?
Oh, the episode was written by Damon Lindelof once again and by Jeff Jensen this time. Jeff Jensen actually was a writer for Entertainment Weekly and has been involved in loads of those kind of behind-the-scenes documentaries for shows like Lost and Firefly and Veronica Mars. He's the kind of person that you'd go to ask their opinion about one of these seminal type of shows. So a lot of his credits are just moments where he's been interviewed within those types of shows. But interestingly, he also wrote the movie Tomorrowland with Damon Lindelof. So that's where they got their connection. That's where they obviously have worked together in the past and are now working together on this series. So kind of cool that he's been involved in the show from the beginning. A lot of people suspected that he'd be the host of the podcast about Watchmen because he did a podcast for Twin Peaks The Return and some other Twin Peaks stuff in the past. So they just expected that he'd be involved in the podcast. I remember seeing his involvement being announced and a lot of people going, oh, okay, well, if he works in the show, then he's not going to be able to do his fan podcast about it. So basically, sometime in 10 or 15 years, John, you could be involved in maybe a Star Trek show where you're writing episodes, or a Star Wars show where you're writing episodes.
Nah, I doubt it.
You never know. You never know. The episode is directed by Nicole Kassell. The third episode she directed of Watchmen after directing the first 2 episodes, which were awesome when we talked a lot about her back then. She's currently working on The Last of the Mohicans for TV. Maybe you could be working on that in a couple of years, John.
Interesting stuff, yeah. No, I loved the movie done by Michael Mann. I thought it was really good. I think it was probably down to the music, a lot of it. But yeah, I really enjoyed that film. It's interesting that it is coming to TV, or maybe not exactly the same, but yeah, kind of interesting. I kind of really like that period of American history. Yeah. The French and the British in North America vying for supremacy, and at the same time, you still have on the East Coast this viable Native American population as well that is inserting itself into this what is pretty much a European struggle being played out on a different continent. Right. So I find that all kind of fairly interesting. So.
Keep an eye out for that.
Might just keep an eye out for it. Yeah. Either that would be horrific and okay.
Well, but you'll definitely give it a chance, though, of course.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. John, do you want to tell us what they gave us with this episode of Watchmen? Episode 8, A Man Walks Into a Bar.
Sure. Although this will be short and sweet. Angela's mysterious past in Vietnam is finally revealed. Mm-hmm. Ta-da!
I was going to update that to Angela and Cal's past was revealed, or Angela, Adrian, Cal, and Dr. Manhattan's past was all revealed.
Well, exactly. I think you could actually, the description of this episode could be all your questions are answered in this episode of Watchmen. Yeah. Pretty much.
Absolutely.
Tune into episode 9 for any remaining answers to questions. But certainly it is more than just about Angela's past. It is about Dr. Manhattan's past, present, future. It is about Adrian Veidt's. It is about Calvin's to an extent, but as Dr. Manhattan. It is about Will Reeves as well. Yeah. It's about what happened on during the White Knight massacre by the 7th Cavalry. So it's more than just Angela, but Angela certainly is this crucible around which everything is happening. Yeah. So really, really interesting. But, dare I say it, dark. I hear a ticking clock.
I don't know whether that works as well when Chris isn't here.
No, I don't think it does. The doomsday clock has been set to 5 minutes to midnight.
With the doomsday clock set at 5 minutes to midnight, or 4, or 12, or 3, or 8. I don't know where we are because everything's happened simultaneously right now. John, do you want to give us your major point about this episode of Watchmen?
Yeah, for me, it's the Plan A, Plan B. It is the meeting of Adrian Veidt and Dr. Manhattan now taking the form of Calvin. I found this interesting across most things. Firstly, that in the 1980s, Adrian Veidt's plan, or attempt, I should say, to kill Dr. Manhattan was actually his plan B. This idea that he would defragment him again into nothing, and that would be the end of him, or the destruction of Dr. Manhattan, was actually a plan B, that he had another plan A, which he had hidden from Dr. Manhattan, which was in the form of suppressing Dr. Manhattan, or John Osterman, suppressing all his feelings so that he would effectively forget who he was. And I think Adrian Veidt here calls it Plan A was for amnesia. Yeah. And he has this piece of metal like in the same style as the atom symbol that you have on, or that Dr. Manhattan has on his forehead.
Yeah, I don't have it on my head, yeah.
And So I thought this was really, really interesting. Going back to the Watchmen comic, and this idea that Ozymandias had a plan A and a plan B, and ultimately had to resort to plan B, but also that this plan A is being offered by Adrian Veidt now in this moment to Dr. Manhattan, who takes it willingly, in order so that he can not only look human, but also in effect feel or act human, and not like a god, so that he suppresses his godlike tendency to be fairly aloof and highfalutin. You know, he suppresses Dr. Manhattan. Yes. And allows effectively Calvin to come back through in this reanimation. So, I mean, effectively Calvin is a zombie. Angela is married to a zombie in some respects. And I thought this was really nice. And I also just thought it was just great coming back to Karnak as well. Seeing all these different things and understanding a lot about Adrian Veidt, because we also see here that his plea, his desperation on Adrian's face, you know, played by Jeremy Irons, I think is exquisite in this moment, where he says, where's my utopia? You know, the one thing for this atom that will make you forget and feel more human is I want an exchange. I want my utopia. To which he replies, it's already created. And, you know, Godspeed, there you go. He transports him to Europa, to that verdant pasture and the manor house. And I just thought Jeremy Irons played that whole bit so well in Karnak with Dr. Manhattan, in the form and image of Calvin. He just seemed tired.
Absolutely.
And, you know, it comes back to as Calvin arrives, you see, I think it's the Taj Mahal on the screen, and he's like, you know, why do you still have the bomb? You know, I've given you wind, solar, blah, 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 blah. And Calvin's introduction to him is because ironically it makes them feel safe.
Yes. Yeah.
And we see him still trying to simulate this alien invasion with the squids.
Absolutely. Like, it's a really difficult balance for the show to pull off here. And I think you're right. They do pull it off really well. You know, they're referencing things that as a viewer of the show, you may not understand at all. You know, even the simple fact of Karnak itself is the lair that Adrian Veidt's been hiding out in. It's in Antarctica, which makes it really difficult for anybody in the world to get to. And this is where he carried out his plan in 1985. This is now 2009 when Cal's version of Dr. Manhattan is arriving to him and telling him the plan that you had, the plan that you did in 1985, yes, it worked, but it still hasn't accomplished the goals that you expected it to accomplish, which was everybody would put nuclear weapons behind them and work together in the world to save the world from possible external threats from the universe, which was what the original plan of Adrian Veidt was. They reference things that you can't have seen if you haven't read the original comic book, which is things like the original conversation between Dr. Manhattan and Adrian Veidt, where he tries to destroy him, and while trying to destroy him, that takes Dr. Manhattan out of what's going on in the world at that moment and allows Adrian Veidt push the button to drop the squid on New York. And that's when he says to him, I already did that. You're not here to stop anything because my plan has already taken place. It's already happened. And what we see also from Adrian Veidt, one of the cool things, as you say, that moment where you see his face and he's looking at what used to be a big, massive panel of 20 or 30 screens focused on multiple things around the world, is now just one or two screens that are still working. Yeah. He's sitting there with his remote control in his hand, which he looks like he's been bashing for years. Because it works about as well as Jane Crawford's remote control for that trapdoor last episode, where she pushed every button to get it to work. He's bashing on one button going, why? What's going on in the world? Why aren't they respecting? Why didn't my most perfect of plans play out the way I expected it to? And you see him almost as a broken man here, because
absolutely
you can almost see that wheel turning where he's going, but this was the only plan that was supposed to work.
I think that's the thing. It's captured so well. You come into Karnak, you see the pharaohs and the grandeur that was there back in the 1980s, and now the pharaohs, those kind of statues, the columns are decayed, that they're falling apart. You have this old technology. I mean, you see the banks of screens. None of them are 69-inch flat screens. They're all the old style. The computer on the desk is the old green screen. The monitor and keyboard in one, so cool. All this old tech. But at the same time, tech that feels relatively new, where he is effectively doing a wormhole or a portal, whereby he's dropping thousands of these of the squid somewhere in the world at that moment.
The cephalopods. Yes.
The cephalopods. And then you also have all these squid pictures around, all hanging on the walls. You've got this sort of big portrait of Ozymandias that plays out. And you get this tiredness, this desperation that his plan that was supposed to play out the way it hasn't. And I like the fact that not only for his grand scheme of plan, but coming back to the whole plan A and plan B about having to tackle Dr. Manhattan, which he thought he had to do in 1985, that there was his plan A, which was with his atom device that gives ultimately Calvin or Dr. Manhattan amnesia here, so he can live for the next 10 years with Angela and not be an insufferable timey-wimey person talking about questions and answers. You can understand why he saw that she would ask him to leave after 6 months, because that would just be infuriating, having questions thrown at you. Well, you're going to tell me, but I'm not going to tell you when. You'll have to find that. Shut up! How could you possibly have conversations like that? No wonder she asked him to leave. But then also the plan B, which ultimately failed to kill him. So actually, Adrian Veidt, the very clever man that he is, the man that likes to put down the plans, is always seeming to run off a plan B or a plan C, or his main plan not working. And I think this ties in quite nicely with the end credit scene at the end, because he's been planning something as well at the Manor House for quite some time. But I think we can come to that later on.
It makes a lot of sense, as you say, for Adrian Veidt to have multiple plans, because he is the smartest man on earth. He's not going to have just one plan and know it plays out. What I do like is that he cuts back to a very big reference that has been used many times from the Watchmen comic book. He cuts back to that moment where he asks Dr. Manhattan, not just the smartest, another one of the smartest people in the world, someone that actually is experiencing the future at all times and experiencing everything at all times. He asks him, is this plan going to work in the end? And Dr. Manhattan says to him, avoiding the question, as Adrian says, well, nothing really ends, does it? Nothing ever ends, It's something that has been used to advertise the fact that the show was coming, the Watchmen TV series. They showed that specific image of Dr. Manhattan saying nothing ever ends. And they've incorporated it back into the show here, where truly he's saying to Adrian Veidt, I'm not going to tell you whether this is the answer to all of the world's problems, because it may be the answer for a few years. It may be the answer for no time at all, because nothing ever ends. There is no end in sight. There is no end to everything. So I love that kind of reference back between the two of them. But interesting that he had this plan A that we hadn't heard about in the past. He talks about using this tachyon device to block this little tiny corner of the world from Dr. Manhattan, so he would never know that this ring was inside here that could block his mind effectively. But what Dr. Manhattan does know, because he's experiencing right now, is that he goes to Adrian Veidt in Antarctica, in Karnak, to get something from him that will resolve the issue that he's having with Angela. This massively frustrating issue, which I'll talk about in one of my later points as well. But I really do like how it all plays out this way in the show. I think it's one of these really interesting ones. That character, I suppose, of Dr. Manhattan is so different than any other character you've ever dealt with in any other show before, I suppose.
Absolutely. I also do like the fact that as Adrian Veidt realizes that Dr. Manhattan is there, he's like, hi, John. And then he goes, only Dr. Manhattan would have the balls to show up here in his birthday suit.
Absolutely.
And what a magnificent birthday suit that was.
It's a beautiful tux as well. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
Really
he changed into that tux.
He did.
Exactly.
He did. Really, really good.
Looking
really fun
very
scene.
smart, indeed.
It's a very good scene. Really enjoyed that. My major moment from the episode, obviously, this is a kind of an odd episode, as we talked about before we started recording, because it is effectively two people sitting in a bar having a conversation and kind of tying up all the loose ends. So quite difficult to pull out big points and small points when it's kind of one narrative spread over many time zones all happening at the same time, if that makes sense. So the one I really wanted to talk about was the creation of Europa. It's something that is released from Dr. Manhattan quite early on when he's having the conversation saying, I'm not actually up on Mars at all. That's kind of like a computer glitch being shown to the world of me sitting there. Actually, I'm over on Europa. He's creating the world from scratch. I find it very interesting. I love the conversation that's going on and the narrative that's going on effectively, that John doesn't see anything odd about the fact that he's using his powers to create human beings and restart the world and create an Adam and Eve, even when that's proposed to him from the Christian theology, I suppose. There's an Adam and Eve and he goes, no, they were fictional characters. What I did was I created those characters for real on my own planet. It's kind of, he doesn't see that as any kind of contradiction to what the question that's being asked to him, which I find fascinating. I love this idea that he's just kind of going, oh, well, it only took me 90 seconds to do. And, and Angela's saying to him, oh, of course, take it from a man to only spend less than 2 minutes creating life,
Well, that's it, because she says, and so do you rest on the seventh day? And it's like, no, it only takes 90 seconds. Yeah.
To just roll out my hand, roll out an entire planet full of creatures, and then reveals that the manor house that's there is something from his childhood that he's basically picked up from England and transferred across the solar system to this moon of Jupiter because it has a connection to him, a special connection to him, as do Miss Crookshanks and Mr. Phillips. They're people that took care of him as a child and revealed, I suppose, the Bible and the story of creation to him.
Yeah, and I like the fact, though, in that moment when they give the Bible, to the young John Osterman, he says, oh, my father doesn't believe in this stuff. And I actually do quite like how Miss Crookshanks says, well, that doesn't matter. There are some good stories here. Mm-hmm. The first one being about Genesis and creation. And then she goes, just promise us that you will do a wonderful creation at some point in your life, whether because he caught them making love to have another baby because of the death of their first child, or whether it's him as a scientist. Again, the original Watchmen comic issues, the creation is about this idea of putting together the intricacies of a mechanical clock with all the wheels and the different cogs in order to get this precision engineering in order to capture time accurately.
Yeah.
So I find this really nice, this bringing together of religion and science here in this moment because of the different interpretations that people may have. And, John Osterman growing up has become a scientist, and ultimately his creation probably was going to be the intrinsic field generator, but ultimately he has generated paradise on Earth. And I like how it comes back to that moment where he says to Adrian Veidt that he's created it, but after having created it, he goes, all they keep giving me is infinite love, and that's a little tiresome for him. So I just left. And later on in the episode, Veidt says to Phillips and Crookshanks, just because you're upset that your blue father went off to get a pack of cigarettes and never came back. So you have all these lovely little links in this whole episode that all make a lovely story.
I totally agree with you. And there's those wonderful moments as well that really tie in. We have John Osterman going, I'm going to create a perfect planet, create a perfect world, exactly as you say. Dr. Manhattan then walks away from that perfect world because all they'll do is worship him and do nothing else. Their hearts are so full of love that all they can do is go, what can we do for you, master? And then Adrian Veidt, who effectively has said to Dr. Manhattan he didn't get the reward he expected to get for saving the world because it has to be kept under wraps. Will I ever see Utopia? And Dr. Manhattan goes, I've already created it. I'll send you off there.
Yeah.
And when he sends him off there, he experiences exactly the same thing. Over many years, we do find out that it's, as we've said before, there's a year goes by every episode. So we know at least he's been there for about 7 to 10 years by this episode, by episode 8. He's been there by that amount of time. Another year passes in this episode as we see the anniversary cake is delivered to him when he's in prison after the trial last episode. So he's having this moment of realization, or has had it for quite a while. Paradise isn't paradise. You need to have something more than that. You need to achieve something more than just being in paradise, I suppose, is kind of where we are now in this episode.
Definitely. I think all of this thing sort of comes, I think, as much to Adrian Veidt's position as well as Angela's and John Osterman's Dr. Manhattan, Calvin. Mm-hmm. I think, well, these are 3 people in one, I suppose.
Well, exactly.
So I find that really fascinating, and I think the story of it has been really nicely woven together.
And I also like, that he is questioned by Angela as to why he left this paradise as he's telling the creation story of Europa, of this planet that he's created. And Dr. Manhattan says to her, well, I had to meet you. And technically he's absolutely accurate because he's experiencing time at all times. He knows he has to be in this place at this exact time. We see an example of that later on in the episode. He knows exactly where he needs to be because he's experiencing it. Yeah. But the question of why are you doing that is a very difficult question for Manhattan to actually answer because he knows he just needs to because he's already done it.
Yeah.
But he does give a reason to Adrian Veidt as to why he left, because he was just being worshipped there and had to walk away from them, effectively. So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. He found it insufferable. Mm-hmm. But, Sark, what is that I hear? I believe it is the ticking of a clock. The doomsday clock has been set to 4 minutes to midnight.
Is Sark even a word, John?
It's an island, actually.
Is it?
Yeah.
Is it? Okay, interesting. Do you want to tell us your medium-sized moment from this episode of The Watchmen?
I think for me, it is the moment he loves her. I think this really comes down to the whole how time is viewed differently between Dr. Manhattan and Angela Abar. Yeah. But I think this moment where Angela does not accept that it's inevitable that Dr. Manhattan, John Osterman, Calvin will be captured by the 7th Cavalry with a Tachyon beam, and that ultimately he will be destroyed. It is her love for him to protect him and to change the inevitable as he sees it. That is the moment that he loves her. And I love the fact that he tells him, because he is that Dr. Manhattan-y, and that, the idea that you just wouldn't say that in that moment, but he does. And her reaction to it, which is like, you tell me this now? So what you're telling me is because her immediate thing in how she views time is that at the very moment that effectively she will lose him, it's like 5 minutes that he's truly loved her. And he's having to explain to her, but back when I walked into the bar in Vietnam, I already knew about this moment, and that's what you would say. So I have always loved you. Yeah. However, this is the moment that informed me that I love you, and why he effectively does walk into a bar in Saigon and goes, I love you. And she goes, hang on a minute, because her perception of time at that moment is she's sat in front of him for 5 minutes. So it's those two contrasting bits which are really, really interesting here, and I absolutely love them. And I think as well, what it kicks off is just showing badass Angela as well against the 7th Cavalry, and I suppose Dr. Manhattan contemplating whether he does go out to help her, or whether he just waiting until the right moment when he does help her in order to fulfill the inevitability that she is so adamant she's going to change in this moment. So it's just really fantastic for me.
And this is the most difficult concept to get across. Even in the original comic book, it always was, this idea that everything's happening at the same moment for Dr. Manhattan, because effectively we're all used to dealing with things like, I suppose, Doctor Who would be a really good example to use here, where a time traveler pops in to a time where something is happening and he makes a change, and that either fixes it or that changes the future. And what's happening here with Dr. Manhattan is he's experiencing everything at the same time. He knows exactly what's going to happen because it's happening right now. And he keeps saying it, and everybody repeats it back to him, and they go, yes, I get what you're saying. You experience time differently. Everything's happening right now. And even though he constantly says that to everybody, everybody's always surprised when he goes, no, I'm dead now, or no, they've caught me, because he knows what was going to happen. He isn't stopping something that is going to happen in the future. He isn't prepared 3 minutes in advance for something that's going to happen in the future. He's already been there, and he already knows it's going to happen. The example that I was talking about earlier on, he's in the kitchen making waffles for himself because he realizes that he's hungry, because he knows that moment has happened where he's been hungry and he's been cooking waffles in the kitchen, and he tells Angela about 7th Cavalry. But it's a really difficult concept to get across, and that's why every character in the show and in the comic book that hears Dr. Manhattan talk to them goes, yeah, I get what you're trying to say, but...
Exactly. It's one of those things I think you get quite a lot of conversations in this episode, certainly across the bar table in Saigon, where Dr. Manhattan says something. So he immediately comes in and he says, well, if I tell you why you're here, can I stay?
Yeah.
And talk to you and ask you on a date, effectively. So he talks about her parents and having been blown up and that sense of loneliness, and that's why she's celebrating VV Day on her own. And she's like, who told you about my parents? And then, the reply is, well, you did. And she's like, well, no, I didn't. He goes, well, yes, you did, in about 30 minutes time. And that's, you have one about, and in 6 months time, you're going to tell me to leave. 10 years time, we will be together, but it will be a tragic end. And it's all these different times. So, I mean, that one about her parents is that literally 30 minutes into the conversation, she does talk about it. And that's that immediate kind of time jump back to where he just said that. So you have a lot of these conversations working their way through.
Yeah, and I love the way he introduces the concept to her specifically, because he's been in a relationship with her for 10 years and all at the same time. He says to her, as he describes his particular state of being, he says, this is a particular frustration to you. So in other words, I've dealt with loads of people who've heard what happens to me, and they've all said their concepts of it. But you specifically, Angela Abar, we've had fights about me knowing what's happening and us barreling towards something that I know is happening. And at one point in 6 months' time, you even kick me out of the house because you're so frustrated.
Exactly.
She goes, how can that be possible? Because I know what's going to happen. You're telling me what happens. And then when they get to that point, she turns to him and says, do you need me to say it? And he goes... Effectively, he wants to say, and he holds himself back, but what he wants to say is, but you've already said it.
Yeah.
But he can't say that to her, so she just says, you need to leave.
Yeah.
So.
But that's it. It's like I was saying before, this perpetual head wreck of knowing but not feeling then in control. Exactly. It's the head wreck of perpetuality. It's like the tunnel of love. And he goes... this is your favorite music, and she's like, but I don't even know this.
I've never even
tune.
heard it before.
I've never heard it before. And it's like, that would just make you go crazy. So you understand why she's then going, well, we're not having an argument. And he's like, no, but it's coming. You see the frustration on her face, and it's just so well acted. I find it really just so well acted. It's her frustration with this. But then later on, you get that you've always found it comforting that I do know the future. But it's, it's a contradiction, because she feels safe that she knows what's coming.
Exactly.
But at the same time, at a moment where she feels, well, I don't want that outcome. I want to change it. There's a frustration here. And you have that where she goes to try and save him right at the end of the episode, but you have it here in the moment of this argument as well. And it's just very, very fascinating.
Absolutely. We are now in the argument. You're damn right we're in the argument. Great moments.
Yeah, really good.
We've strayed directly into my medium point for the episode, which is Dr. Manhattan experiencing all time at the same time. Because there are two great outcomes. Let's talk about the other two pieces that fall into place here in the episode, John. Number one, we've always wondered why Will Reeves knew what was going to happen and why he had a countdown clock in his own head going, in 3 days' time, Angela's going to know exactly what I did. Well, she knows because Dr. Manhattan went and visited him in 2009 and said, on this day at this time, you're going to have your grandkids in your possession, and Angela's going to be really pissed off about it, but it's going to be coming from me, and she's going to be coming over to meet you to pick up her kids, effectively. So he's always had the countdown clock. It's nothing to do with Lady True. No idea about that. Nothing to do with that. He's not suddenly developed certain superpowers. He's gotten all the information that he needed to start this whole thing off from Dr. Manhattan. And also, and this is the big irony, I suppose, of the entire show, right? Angela realizes that she's the one that got Judd Crawford killed by casting suspicion and creating the environment in which he was killed by Will Reeves. She asks the question through time to Will Reeves, why did you kill Judd Crawford? And is it because he has a KKK costume inside of his wardrobe? And it turns out Will Reeves now knows to kill Judd Crawford because he is a member of Cyclops and he has this outfit inside his wardrobe, and that's why he's killed, because of the piece of information that traveled through time from Angela Abar. Yeah. So we were wondering why he was killed, and we were wondering, was there a big question over his head as to whether he's a racist or not? It didn't matter. Will Reeves acted on the information he was given from the future, from Angela Abar, didn't do any further investigation because he assumed that was what was supposed to happen from a person in the future telling him that's what happened.
Yeah, I mean, actually, this is straying into my 3 minutes to midnight point, which is the chicken and the egg. Mm-hmm. It's the cause and effect. It's that Angela is experiencing the effect of Will Reeves having killed Judd Crawford.
Yeah.
But she's actually the cause of it because after the fact of Judd Crawford's hanging and lynching by Will Reeves, she is having a conversation with Dr. Manhattan, who is at the same time having the conversation with Will Reeves, where they're having this conversation across time as granddaughter and grandfather, where she asks him about seminal moments that we've seen in his life, about Cyclops. How did you know that Judd Crawford was connected to Cyclops? Yep. How did you know that he had a Klansman's robe in his wardrobe? But he didn't. She told him. So now she is the cause of the effect that happens. It's not Will Reeves being the cause and the effect that we have been watching in the normal time sense in this series. So it just absolutely switches the cause and effect. And so hence the chicken and the egg element that Dr. Manhattan talks about, and we have replicated in the bar when he is asked to provide evidence that he can generate life. And it's almost like a magic trick. And I think that's why Angela is so skeptical about it, because all of a sudden this egg appears in his hand. It's like bringing a ping pong ball or something like that.
Absolutely.
And
because we've all seen that kind of trick from a standard magician.
Yeah, exactly.
She's expecting something far bigger, like he opens his hand. And as she said, I was expecting the chicken inside your hand, not the egg. So yeah, I love it. I love Dr. Manhattan's moment of realization as well, where he says to himself out loud, oh, the chicken and the egg happened at exactly the same time. Me going to the house and creating the tunnel back to speak to Will Reeves is what allowed her to start the whole thing off, send Will Reeves to this exact place and time in 2019 to kill the head of police, kicking off all of everything that's going on in this world. Well, that's a chicken and egg scenario. Both happened exactly the same time. One didn't start the other. Both started it simultaneously and both led to this outcome, effectively. So really, really fascinating stuff for this episode.
Well, yeah, and yeah, in reality, it is probably that the chicken evolved to create an egg as their form of reproduction.
Perhaps. But nobody knows for sure. Nobody knows for sure. So that's the whole reason it's a big question, I suppose, right?
Or the question is actually the dinosaur and the egg, because birds are generally seen to have come from a reptilian evolution.
Question solved. If a tree falls in the wood, John, and nobody's there to hear it, has it actually fallen?
Well, exactly. Who knows?
But I do hear something.
The doomsday clock has been set to 3 minutes to midnight.
We are all over the place with our 5, 4, and 3 minutes to midnight, but that's to be expected in this episode, right?
Yeah, I think so.
But our smallest point, the little thing that we haven't talked about so far, John, I suppose, is where we are for our final moment in our countdown for this episode. What final little thing you haven't talked about would you want to talk about in this point? We took your chicken and egg and kind of brought it back into the last point, I suppose. So what small point have you not talked about yet?
I think for me, my other sort of little moment here is when Adrian Veidt indicates that a little elephant had told him that Dr. Manhattan was in fact on Europa and not on Mars, and that he was projecting that. Obviously from last week, the realization when you said that the Lady True's symbol for her company is the shape of an elephant with its trunk and its 2 ears, and also then with the tusks as well. But also then the drugged up elephant helping Angela Abar recover from the effects of nostalgia, the memory pills. So again, it's this link of what role Lady True is going to have in all of this. We know that she's trying to stop events that have been initiated by the 7th Cavalry. We know that Lady True has been harbouring, at least, maybe helping Will Reeves. We know that Will Reeves has met Dr. Manhattan from this episode. We know that Dr. Manhattan met with Adrian, and he helped him, or thought he was. And we still maybe need to understand the connection between Adrian and Lady True for the full understanding to become apparent. But they obviously, I think, know each other. With that line, a little elephant told me. And so in that respect, she obviously worships his contributions, hence the statue. So it will be interesting to see how that works out as well.
There's so many ideas out there about this fight and true connection. There's one out there, and I'll show it to you later, John. You have to write it down. There's one out there that effectively, if you hold up the word true into a mirror, it kind of looks a little bit like Veidt backwards. If you put it side by side to a mirror, I'll show you. It does look quite similar. But I find it fascinating because Lady True was a real character from 300 BC. So very unlikely that they chose it based on putting Veidt up against a mirror and going, that's actually a name from mythology, I suppose, in Vietnam. So that's very unlikely. But I love that someone's come up with that connection. There's so many ideas that could have happened. What we know now is that Adrian Veidt was sent off of Earth in 2009, and we don't think he's come back. Potentially that explosion that happened in the land that Lady True bought a couple of episodes ago could have been the return of Adrian Veidt to Earth. That's entirely possible.
Exactly.
But have they had any connection for that whole time at all? Has there been any kind of communication between the two of them? Did he know Lady True before he left Earth? We don't know yet. There's still not anything on screen that's told us that. But I love these little mentions of a little elephant told me, well, maybe there was some connection between Lady True and Adrian Veidt while he was on the planet Europa, or on the moon Europa. Another little thing that we don't know just yet, but I love those little references in there. Interesting. That's your little point for the episode?
Yeah. Derek, what's yours?
My final one that I want to talk about for this episode really is the body selection scene, because I think it's really interesting. They're together 2 weeks, right? Angela and John Osterman, let's call him, Dr. Manhattan, in his body of Dr. Manhattan. They've been together 2 weeks, and she's had this idea that they can't go out in public if he still looks the way he looks, effectively. And she shows him a number of bodies of people that have died in varying circumstances, no damage to the bodies as such. They've all died, and none of them have any families, so they're just going to be off to be cremated, effectively. And they have that conversation between the two of them. Again, bear in mind that no matter what the outcome, Dr. Manhattan has already experienced it. So he's being quite polite with Angela, kind of going, well, I'm not going to make a choice because I don't care. I have no care in the world as to what I look like on the outside. And I have a different experience of the world than you do, Angela. You need to pick because you clearly do have an idea or something in your head that tells you what way you want me to look. And she takes out a fourth body, this body of Calvin Jelani. She pulls that out in a drawer and says, well, I'd be happy to experience the rest of my life with you looking like this, the next 10 years with you looking like this. So that sets up the instant question, what relationship did they have with each other in the past? That's instantly where I go is, why is she waiting to show the body of Calvin to Dr. Manhattan? Is she giving him the appearance of choice by showing three completely different bodies to him? Was it always the plan to say, I want Calvin as your host? Or did they have a relationship in the past? There's a touch of sadness, I suppose, when she describes how Calvin died. She said he had a heart attack out of nowhere and died. And now he has nobody to pay for his funeral, nobody to pay for any kind of arrangements at all for him. So he's just going to be put into the incinerators and burned. There's just that moment of sadness from her where it sounds like she was there possibly when he died. And something was happening between the two of them, or some kind of relationship, something had happened in the past. And I don't know whether we're in this last episode, we're ever going to get that explanation as to who Calvin was. But they've done a great job of explaining everything else so far, that it makes me wonder, did she know him? Or does she just feel that sense of true loss when someone at the age, I guess, mid-30s has a heart attack and dies? And that's the end of their life. Does she just have that moment of, oh God, there's so much that this guy could have experienced and he has absolutely no family to take care of and nobody to miss him and he's gone in an instant?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I mean, I definitely got that as well, that it felt like the other three were kind of detached, objective bodies that she was saying for Dr. Manhattan to inhabit.
Yeah.
And then, yes, why didn't she show Calvin as a fourth option in that? It took Dr. Manhattan to tease that out from her. That's ultimately her choice. And there was that sense that she, in some way, knew him. Maybe he was a colleague in the police force. Perhaps, maybe someone that she had dealt with. Maybe not even necessarily a romantic relationship, but someone that she got on with. And so having that familiarity with that form is what she can live with.
Potentially, yeah.
So, it definitely, it is that little poignant moment in the mortuary here, I think. You know, it's nice to have some potentially fuzzy, unanswered questions. Yeah. I'm sure we're still going to have loads, actually, even by the end of the final episode. But I think this one, it doesn't as such need to be explained. Okay. But I think you can just think that there was something there between Calvin, Jelani, and her. Yeah. Whether it's a friendship, a work thing, or a romantic thing, and that's why she ultimately chose him.
Yep, absolutely. Just thought definitely good to highlight. There's a couple of other things we need to highlight, but they're more in our 2 minutes to midnight moment, right?
Yes. The doomsday clock is now at 2 minutes. I repeat, 2 minutes to midnight.
So, points, Easter eggs, and comic connections, you notice. Just a couple of points I just want to bring up two directly after talking about the selection of Calvin, I suppose. Because Dr. Manhattan goes, I really like the name Calvin. Just to point out, the name Calvin means bald or hairless, which Dr. Manhattan is. So a nice little touch. Hidden right in front of our plain sight for the last 7 episodes. The Cal means bald or hairless, and he has been Dr. Manhattan this whole time. So nice little touch there. Also, really like the moment from Adrian Veidt where he goes to Dr. Manhattan. It's not the 80s anymore. This type of appropriation of another body doesn't go down very well now in the 90s, you know? Or in the 2000s, sorry. It doesn't go down very well anymore. That's a nice little moment from Adrian Veidt. A nice reference to the fact that everybody always does this crap in comic book movies where they go, that character's always been white. Well, actually, Dr. Manhattan has always been blue. In the entire time you've known Dr. Manhattan, since you're a kid, he's been blue. So he's now chosen to inhabit the body of Calvin for very obvious reasons in the show. That was the choice of the person who was going to spend 10 years with him as a person. So it makes total sense in the show. But a nice little touch there from Adrian Veidt.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've got as one of my notes is I feel the music is very defined in terms of different situations here. And it actually links to another note that I have, which is that moment when you have the entry of Ozymandias' atom device into the head of Calvin and Dr. Manhattan there in Vietnam. And as it goes in, and then you have the exit of it with the blood dripping all over it as Angela's holding it after she's extracted it from his hammered forehead in Tulsa. And all the music in Vietnam seems to be relatively lively, upbeat. You know, you've got the Tunnel of Love, you've got the Blue Danube Waltz, and that's on Europa. You have the music seems lively. It seems much lighter. And then as soon as you have this whole sequence in Tulsa in their home with the 7th Cavalry, you've got that really oppressive tones of the Trent Reznor mix as soon as you're back in Tulsa. And it's really, really sort of great tonality to the different parts of this. You know, I think because you've got a lot of this conversation between Dr. Manhattan and Angela in a bar, so that kind of background, it's lively, there's people socializing, that's where the Tunnel of Love comes on, you have this whole thing of creation on the moon Europa, so you have, one of the great European composers with the waltz and the Blue Danube in Schubert being played, and they're all light and joyous and one of creativity,
and there's also some underlying meanings. The tunnel is massively important within the episode. We also have the song that's playing when he's getting the device input into his brain. The song that's playing is "It's All a Matter of Time." Just as that's happening, as John Osterman's saying goodbye for 10 years to his wife, effectively, to his partner. He's disappearing into the past, and it's a matter of time he will be out of the tunnel to see her on the other end.
Well, and he talks about that tunnel where he can't see what's going to happen. Which is really interesting.
Absolutely. Other really interesting ones that are in there. What is going on with walking on water? Obviously, from a Christianity point of view, there is that story from the Bible of Jesus walking on water. That's a way that he almost proved to people that he was divine, I suppose. Dr. Manhattan mentions it almost off the cuff that he's walking across the water on Europa, and Angela stops the story and kind of goes, hang on a second, do you walk on water? He goes, yeah, I do that occasionally. She mentions again, could you give powers to someone? He says, I could put it into something that they could eat, and that would give them power. And she says, could you put your power into an egg, and that would allow me to walk on water? And then towards the end of the episode, we see him walking on their swimming pool, so walking across the water of the swimming pool. And Angela goes out to confront him because he's just made the kids vanish off to Will Reeves' house. And he says, remember this, it's important for later. You need to see this. And she goes, all right, I've seen it. What happened to the kids, kind of thing. So that's definitely a through line throughout the episode. We saw 3 mentions of it and saw it twice on screen, him walking on water. So what's that got to do with the final episode and the final battle, I suppose, between what 7th Cavalry are going to do and what they're going to try and do to Dr. Manhattan? So what has walking on water got to do with the last episode?
Well, he says you need to see it.
It's important for later. Yeah. And quickly, just to mention that final scene, I suppose, that we said, the moment that plays out after the credits, where we have Adrian Veidt up in this prison in Europa. We see kind of the playing out of what's going on. He's reading Fog Dancing, this book about loneliness, this very famous book in this universe, I suppose. He's talking to the gamekeeper, who reveals that he was the first of the Mr. Phillips that appeared on the planet of Europa, and he's been there the whole time. He's seen everything. And effectively what we see from the gamekeeper is that he's evolved, right? Everybody else on the planet is still talking to Adrian Veidt as their master. They're still even calling him master. They're saying to him, will you stay master? He's saying no, and then they're throwing tomatoes in his face. Whereas gameskeeper Mr. Phillips is telling him to enjoy his effing cake. He's actually angry at him that his master would walk away once again, would try and leave once again. It feels like while Dr. Manhattan left them all behind because they over-worshipped Dr. Manhattan while they were left behind, it seems like the Gameskeeper became leader of this planet, effectively.
Definitely. I think, again, for the notes, it is this post-credit scene. And I think what's really interesting that comes from it is that this utopia, this idea of people's utopia and paradise being heaven, at least within a Christo-religious sense, that you have Veidt saying here, heaven doesn't need me. And probably the opposite being true is that he doesn't want heaven after the insufferability of just pure worship. He goes, but my 8 billion children do in their cribs back on Earth need their father, their master. And I think that's really interesting, along with the fact that finally with Veidt in prison for the crimes that he did, for the fact that he does want to leave, they're keeping him confined, but he gets the cake and the horseshoe at the right moment in time in order to enact his plan. So all these moments where he's giving out to Miss Cruikshanks and Mr. Phillips because he has another cake at another moment with the horseshoe embedded in it. I don't need it now, he says. You know, we have that moment where he doesn't require it. And here, it's the right moment at the right time.
So it's like they have an embedded idea in their head that they must deliver him a cake and it must have a horseshoe with it at some point, but they don't know when. So that feels like a Dr. Manhattan thing, that he embedded something in them but didn't give them the timing right because he operates outside of time in a way. Yeah.
Well, they're doing it all the time because it operates across all types of time.
Exactly.
So is it the past that he needs it, the future, or the present?
Yeah. Just a really interesting concept. And once again, can I make a reference to Lost here that you might not like, John? Once again, this idea that from the first episode, we've been saying the first time we saw Adrian Veidt, he's been imprisoned somewhere for the crimes that he committed.
Yeah.
And then in this episode, he has actually been imprisoned for the crime that matters on the planet of Europa. He's been imprisoned for trying to escape Europa. And what we find in this episode, his conversation with Dr. Manhattan is, yes, please send me to paradise. So he's not been in prison this whole time. He's been in paradise this whole time and has only just gone into prison. The reference to Lost there being everybody thinks Lost was they arrived in purgatory in the first episode of episode 1 of season 1 and they ended in purgatory, when in fact they ended in purgatory after their lives had been completed. So I think it's a nice little veiled reference to what the actual meaning of Lost was, but that could be me. I read loads into Lost as it went on. One other reference that I would like to bring in here as well, we talked about a little bit this relationship of Angela experiencing time normally with her partner who's experiencing time opposite to her almost, and completely differently at least. Definitely gave me vibes of Doctor Who and River Song, this idea of them meeting at different times in their relationship and kind of one experiencing it less and less over time, that knowledge of each other as they meet and spend time together. If you remember from Doctor Who, the first meeting of the two of them is River Song knows everything about him, and the last meeting of the two, Doctor Who and River Song, Doctor Who knows everything about River Song and she knows nothing about him. So I think that's a similar kind of idea of love over time in different directions, I suppose. So just give me nice little vibes of that, because I always love that storyline.
As I said at the start, I think this is the most timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly. It is very Doctor Who-y. However, I do think it's done probably, certainly for a single episode, very well.
Of course, absolutely, yeah. No, I just wanted to make the reference because it's a story I really enjoy. That's it, probably. Let's close it out. The two of us have probably talked a lot about this episode and probably could talk another hour more as well.
Definitely.
But John, what did you think of this episode of Watchmen? Episode 8, A God Walks Into Abar.
I thought this was great. Again, it's just fascinating. I just want to watch the next episode. Mm-hmm. This is really good TV. It's phenomenal TV, actually. And that's why I give it 5 birthday suits out of 5.
Absolutely.
Again, I'm really enjoying this. I'm having a lot of fun moving in and out of the craziness. I think, in our feedback episode, one of our fellow watchers was saying about how he wanted to maybe get a bit more clarity about what was going on with Adrian Veidt in the manor house and in that area. And I think we kind of get that here.
Definitely.
Actually, I think we really get the sense of Adrian Veidt's story and how it connects to that paradise on Europa, and that it's finally confirmed that it is that. And he went there with free will, and he's slowly now sort of acting against it. At the same time, we have this this reveal of Dr. Manhattan, his intentions, that he has been a significant part of Angela Abar's life, as we saw with that whole revelation right at the end of episode 7, where she pulls out the atom device from his smashed up cranium. And we get to find out about that. We get to find out about Angela. So this really has been great TV.
Yeah.
And I feel it's now, we will be in Tulsa seeing everything that plays out with True, 7th Cavalry, Senator Keene, probably with Agent Blake and Looking Glass, all there. These different levels of the story, these different timelines of the story being really nicely worked together, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
So absolutely 5 birthday suits out of 5 for me.
Right, that's absolutely what I'd say. Yeah, definitely a 5 out of 5 for this episode. It's been really enjoyable watching this series so far take shape. And what I'm really impressed with, I suppose, is we've talked about these episodes twice a week for the last 8 episodes, and they really are subverting expectations when it gets to explanations they're giving or detail that they're giving behind what happened to a character and how they got to their positions or got to their place in these episodes. Yes, some people might consider them as flashbacks or backstory, but it's massively complex, massively more complex than just going, what happened that night? I walked into a bar and talked to her, and that's how we had our first date. Well, actually, everything I tell you right now plays into every single moment. There's been a hidden hand behind every single moment that's played out since the first episode, and that hidden hand, unknowingly, has been Dr. Manhattan and Angela Abar. From right at the beginning, she's the one that started it all, and it's going to lead to a massive confrontation in the last episode, and has possibly led to the death of her partner in Dr. Manhattan. So I think this is a fascinating way to tell a story, and they've done a great job of hiding things in plain sight and also hiding story beats that we've had questions about and giving us the answers to them in a timely manner, in a really well delivered manner in this episode particularly. Really enjoyable. I'm really shocked that we only have 1 episode left of the series next week. And one of the things I really like about this episode is that it does reveal why everything is focused on Tulsa, and it is Angela Abar's choice as that conversation goes. We're going to move back to Tulsa because that's where my family are from. We have a question from Will Reeve, why the hell does she want to come back to Tulsa of all places? And Dr. Manhattan goes, well, that's where her family are from. So revealing effectively the whole reason why this massive, huge story spanning the entire solar system effectively is taking place in somewhere like Tulsa is because, well, that's where Will Reeve was based. And time has played out that her grandmother came over to pick her up from Saigon and told her how great Tulsa was. So she knows that she has a history in Tulsa. So everything is focused on there because Dr. Manhattan's focused on Angela and focused on pleasing her. So she's taken the whole story there, and everybody is focused on there all because of her. As she said, did I start this whole thing? Yes, you did, actually. So fascinating that they've been able to provide those kind of details, and really good episode.
Absolutely. Good stuff. I think we're all looking forward to episode 9 of Watchmen. But remember, fellow watchers, look out for our feedback podcast as well coming up, the bulletin of our Atomic Watchers next week. So please send in any of your thoughts, discussion points, theories, anything to do with episode 8 of Watchmen or the whole series. You can send in thoughts to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com, or you can join our Facebook group over at facebook.com/groups/TV Podcast Industries. And we have our spoiler posts and commenting section within that for anything to do with the specific episodes. Yep. And of course, you can head on over to our website at tvpodcastindustries.com and record up to 90 seconds of your thoughts about the week's episode. Just click on the right-hand side tab, the voicemail tab there, and you can send that into us as well. Remember, we'd love to hear from everyone for our Bulletin of Our Atomic Watches feedback podcast. Cut-off time is basically Wednesday at 2 minutes to midday.
There you go.
GMT, which, of course, is multiple time zones across the world. Yep. It is 1 p.m. Wednesday in Central Europe. It's 11 a.m. in Wednesday for the US East Coast, 4 a.m. Wednesday for the US West Coast, and 10 p.m. Wednesday in Melbourne, Australia. So that's all we're going to give you for this moment. But yes, please send in your thoughts and discussion points.
I think your East Coast time was wrong there. It's 7 a.m. Wednesday East Coast.
Oh, maybe it's 7 a.m.
Yeah, 7 a.m.
Yes.
but we're all experiencing that time at the same time. It's important.
Exactly.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode. Make sure you share the podcast if you've been enjoying our thoughts on The Watchmen. Share the podcast with your friends and show them why you like it. Sharing our podcast is sharing the love. You can also support the podcast by going over to patreon.com/TV Podcast Industries. We'll give you some more details of the kind of stuff that we'll be covering in 2020 as we get towards the end of Watchmen. We're still very focused on finishing out this season the way we've been doing it all throughout the season, but we've been so glad that some people have decided to support us over on Patreon as well. So if you'd like to do that, pop over to patreon.com/TV Podcast Industries and you could support us there. We will be back for the Watchmen finale.
Yes, see how they fly. Ooh, I'm getting Game of Thrones vibe with the eerie in the Vale.
Make the bad man fly,
yeah,
mother.
where they go out the moon door,
Yes.
is it, or the sun door?
The moon door, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes, let's see how they fly.
Yep, no synopsis for the final episode, but who'd want a synopsis for the finale? I suppose the synopsis is probably, well, that's it, that's the end, but nothing ever ends. Bye-bye, watchers. Keep watching The Watchmen.
Yes, thank you, fellow watchers, for the dinner last night. It was gorgeous. I have seen into the future. And for those of you that join me, even though it's a bit of a struggle to get some of you along from the past, we have had a great dinner out tomorrow night. So it was great. Thank you so much, fellow watchers, for joining us. As always, it is a great pleasure chatting all things Watchmen with you. And remember, fellow watchers, keep watching, keep listening. Bye. This was a Televisual Podcast Industries production. You have been listening to the Watchmen podcast.